people would not know about India. I mean, it's like you are brown skinned, so you could be from the Middle East. So I remember somebody telling me, you guys started all this. And I was like, no, India is very different. It's a different continent. For the first time, you realize that you are defined by the color of your skin. I think that any person who is creative is always sort of thinking about the past, and also the present. At least for me, I think this search for a place I can call home is something which is still there in my present.
Being an artist can be a heck of a ride, but you're not alone. On Journey of the Art, we tell inspiring stories of artists and chat with those who support us on this path. I'm your host, Lola Opataya, writer, editor, singer, and all round lover of words. Come with me on the journey. Hi, and welcome to Journey of the Arts. Today we're talking about belonging in the poetry collection Firefly Memories. The collection is part memoir and travelogue and explores the idea of redefining home and the search for safe places. My guest and author of Firefly Memories is Jonaki Ray. Jonaki is a poet, writer, and editor in New Delhi, India. She's also the author of Lessons in Bending. Jonaki was nominated for the 2018 Pushcart Prize and the 2018 Forward Prize for Best Single Poem, and she won the first prize in the 2017 Oxford Brookes International Poetry Contest in the ESL category. Jonaki is a 2019 Iceland Writers Retreat Alumni Award winner, and she has been shortlisted for multiple other awards. To find out more about Jonaki, please check out the description box or the show notes. Welcome, Jonaki.
Hi, Lola. It's good to connect with you again.
I know.
Yeah.
That this feels like such a full circle moment.
Yes.
Like 5 years ago, we were both recipients of the Iceland Writers Alumni Award, and here we are talking about your book and all the amazing stuff that you're doing. I love it.
Thank you.
And welcome. Okay, so before we begin, here is a reminder that Journey of the Art is available wherever you get your podcasts. So feel free to listen on the go, follow the show, and leave a comment. This really helps to boost our visibility so more folks like you can discover us. Also, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram, so please follow the show at Journey of the Art Pod. Okay, Jonaki, why don't you start us off by sharing a bit about your writing journey? I know that you are a trained scientist. So, how have you found yourself in the arts, writing poetry, and winning all these awards?
Well, unlike many writers, I'll start off with saying I never thought I'll be a writer. And I was a trained scientist. My father was a professor. He was a um, earth scientist, a geologist.
Mhm.
And I grew up in a small college town, a pretty prestigious engineering college, but it's a relatively small town about 5 hours away from Delhi. Um, Originally, I'm from Bengal. So I'm telling you this because I think now that I look back, there was a sense of displacement even as a
Mm.
child because I grew up in the north, but my family's roots are in the east of India. So the language and everything was a bit of a hodgepodge.
Mhm.
And I followed my father's footsteps to a certain point, like I think a lot of kids in South Asia too.
Yeah.
And, I was good in studies. I loved English. But my parents, especially my mother, felt I should study science because it is, quote unquote, the safe
Yeah.
area. And I was a good student. I also got through it's called the Indian Institute of Technology.
Mhm.
And there were only 12 women who got
Wow.
selected in a batch of 320.
Wow.
So the ratio was very skewed. So again, these are things I have realized later. As a child, as a teenager, I could sense there's something a little
Yeah.
unusual, but I didn't realize the gender, skewedness that
Mhm.
I saw. And there was a lot of attention on the women students because the ratio is one woman to 25 men. And
Wow.
these are all young men who don't know how to talk to women,
Wow.
the typical geeky. And so
Mm-hmm.
were we. I mean, I was also very geeky, always into books. Um, so I was always a reader. I wrote a bit for the college magazine, and then I went to the US, and I realized that there are different fields, and I took some gender studies courses, and I went through some personal issues. And I faced racism because 9/11 had happened.
Mm.
And it was a shock to me because in India, the average person uh, watches the news and knows a lot about the US and what is happening in the world. But I was in this, again, a great college, but
Mm-hmm.
a small college town. And people would not know about India. I mean, it's
Mm.
like you are brown skinned, so you could be from the Middle East. So I
Yeah.
remember somebody telling me, "You guys started all this," and I was like, "No, India is very different. It's a different
Yeah.
continent." And so there were these overt racism, and I also saw that. There are obviously very good things. I have very good friends in the US, but I also saw that the justice system is really broken, and there's a
Mm.
cycle for people who are not, you know, don't have the money or the
Yeah.
resources. I did a bit of volunteer work and things like that. So that's when I started writing,
Yeah.
and I came back to India, and I decided to follow my heart. And get into writing, much to the dismay of my parents, because my mother was like, "Oh no, there she goes again." And I quit my PhD program, so my father was
Wow.
very upset. I had a full fellowship to a PhD in
Wow.
theoretical chemistry.
Wow. And you walked away from that.
Yeah, so I walked away
Wow.
from that. I came back and I was like, nah, I want to be a writer. And I sat at home for I think 3, 4 months, and I was sending my work out and getting rejected. And I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? And
Wow.
my parents were really, especially my mother, because I think she did not have that luxury of an education.
Mm.
My grandparents, especially my grandfather, was quite patriarchal, and my aunt, and I have a poem about my aunt and a bit about my mother. They
Yeah.
were both married off at pretty young ages. So again, these are things that I've learned and processed through my writing and obviously
Yeah.
my own healing journey.
Yeah.
Um, and then it was I mean, it's like a fluke that I got a job as a journalist,
Mm.
because I thought I will write as a freelancer, and I went to meet a journalist. There's a leading newspaper called the Times of India, and I taken printouts of my work, and she just looked at it, put it aside, and said, "Why don't you join my team?" And
Wow.
she spoke in a very low voice, and I was like, "Did I hear her right?" Because I was too scared to ask her. Like, can you say it again? So I came back home and I said, I think I got a job offer, but I'm
I
not
think.
sure. And then I sat on it and I called her and she did not pick the phone. And finally she picked up and she was like, "Yeah, there's a process. There will be an edit test." And I was like, "What the heck is an edit test?" So that started my journey as an editor.
Mm-hmm.
And this was way back in 2005. So I'm going to finish 20 years as an editor.
Wow.
And then I got a job in a publishing house, and then there was a full circle moment a few years ago where I was looking for a job in publishing, but again a friend said, "Why don't you apply for this job in a technology firm?"
Mm.
So I worked there as an editor, so I'm the technical editor.
Wow.
So that sort of combines a bit of my science background with
Mm.
bit of my editorial and writing. But um, I think a few years ago, I we were just discussing that
Yeah.
there was a phase when I was really disciplined about my reading and writing. I think up to COVID, I was reading and I was writing, and I had a routine, and I would go to work
Yeah.
and I'd come back and write. And then COVID happened. Everything
Yeah.
got messed
Yeah.
up. And I think I need to get back to it
Yeah.
because I'm not one of those people who got into writing because this was my dream. I think for me, writing is almost like a healing journey, you know? So that's
Right.
why I feel your
Right.
podcast title is very interesting because it's a journey for me. So when
Yeah.
I don't write, I actually feel very uneasy.
Hmm.
Um, and
That's pretty much where I am right now.
yeah.
So much unease, and like you said, I think something got broken during COVID. I
Hmm.
was talking with someone the other day, and I was saying to him, "Oh, I could not write, in 2020. I just zoned out. I just like it was like a switch just went off." And
Yeah.
he was like, "Really? Like that's the time that a lot of people did stuff." I was like, "Oh, I don't know. There was just something about that year that, got turned off." And even until this moment, like it's been that journey trying to get back to that discipline and that dedication to the art. So like I was saying to you earlier on, it's interesting how alike, artists can be,
Hmm.
but you don't know that until you actually speak to people and you discover that, people have the same struggles that you do.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting journey. And so I want us to start to talk about Firefly Memories, which is your poetry collection that you wrote from your experiences in the US. And just, I guess, the experiences from growing up. Yes, the beautiful Firefly Memories.
Yes.
Love the cover.
Thank you. Well, it's by a very senior artist who passed away last year.
Oh,
So it's actually a part of a mural. Uh, it's it's a beautiful painting,
wow.
and he was 86 years old. He let us use a part of it
Wow.
free of charge as a cover.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is interesting. That is
Yeah.
so interesting. Yeah. That's great. So would you like to read a portion for us from the collection before we get started about the book?
Yeah. So I was, I was telling you about my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and initially I thought I'll read a poem called Fireflies, but I read it somewhere else. So I think I'll read this poem called Verdigris, which is, the copper green color that,
Mm-hmm.
uh, when you have copper, it turns that strange
Yeah.
orangish greenish
Yeah.
because of oxidation. And this poem actually I wrote inspired by artist and her painting, which she painted a series in memory of her dad, who was
Mm.
suffering from Alzheimer's and who had passed away. So it was partly inspired by his painting, but I also remembered my dad. And like I said, my dad passed away last year. So
Yeah.
I thought this will be a good, appropriate poem.
Yeah.
Verdigris. If I have to tell you, it would be the constants that formed him once. The clean shaven chin, the double knotted tie, the tucked in shirt, the upright stance, the gaze that hit yours square like a catapult on the mango trees. He still has his head thrust forward, but now it's for balancing the slouching spine, like the roots that bind a tree around a crumbling temple wall. His chin jellies, trying to remember your name some days, but he narrates his college romance like a blues song. No one told you that love is also this, a father letting you leave him and be free, even when his world is disintegrating like wood overchewed by termites, his hands sparrowing the sky, forgetting that it is air that mixes age into copper and humans alike.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Thank you.
That's so beautiful and sad, and it's so beautiful. I mean, I have some experiences with, my parents getting older, and just the pain of watching that aging process kick in, and nobody tells you, like you said, that this is what love looks like, embracing who they are in this phase of life. So thank you so much for sharing that beautiful poem. um Jonaki, can you tell me what your goal was for this collection? I mean, I think I have a fair idea of what it is, but for those who may not know, who have not read the work, can you share what inspired the work and what your goal was for the collection?
So I had a tough time putting this collection together because I don't have one particular theme per se.
Mm,
And when and like I said, I didn't study literature.
yeah.
So I was kind of like, okay, how do I put a book collection together? And then I thought about it, and it's a mix of memoir, like you said.
Yeah.
So it's partly inspired. Um, it's not like a complete autobiography, but it's inspired. There's a takeaway and takeoff point from something that happened in my life, in my
Mm,
family's history, and then the poem sort of it's almost like creative poetry,
yeah.
creative nonfiction in a
Yeah.
poetry form. But I also realized during my experience as an immigrant, and also I've been traveling a lot as a solo woman traveler, and I'm very interested in the fact that people who are affected the most all over the world are women and children, and I
Mm,
see this history repeating itself. So in 2016, I was traveling to Europe, and I went to Istanbul and I went to Spain. And in Istanbul, it was about um, the the caliphate and the Bosphorus and the Byzantine Empire, and how
right.
the churches were overtaken.
Right.
And in Spain, it was the reverse.
Yeah.
But then I felt that who really suffers when this happens is women and children.
Mm,
So I started writing based on that, and whether it's in India or the US, also immigrants and migrants. And I have done some work, and I have met women who have been in abusive situations, who have been exiled or incarcerated. So there are poems based on those stories.
yeah.
And usually, when people think of poetry, and this is at least my experience, they always say, "Oh my God, poetry, that's very difficult." And I try to tell them that this is not um, that abstract sort of style. This is very much about real lived experiences. It's
Yeah.
almost like short stories, short flashes.
Yes.
So my aim was to give voice to the voiceless, the children, the women, even during COVID, um, because it happened so suddenly. I saw, and many people wrote about it, that in India there is this internal migration.
Mm,
People come from small villages to cities like Delhi, and they are daily wage workers. They clean houses, they clean cars, they're gardeners, they're cooks, they are standing outside very, big houses. They're the security guards. And when COVID happened, everything shut down and nobody wanted to take their responsibility. So
yeah.
they literally had to walk back to their home. So there's also these migrant workers, and their lives are also very tough. And again, nobody really talks about that.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 million people apparently walked back home.
Wow.
So I have some poems based on that also towards the later half. So there are four parts in this book, and the first and the fourth parts are sort of semi autobiographical, and the
Mm,
second and third are based on the politics around and people I met during my travel, or some events that I read about.
mhm.
Um, so that's how I tried to put together this collection.
Yeah, that's very insightful. I love that initial starting point, asking the question, who gets most affected,
Hmm.
right? Like when these things happen. And I very much see that style being more like a short story. These are lived experiences and they
Yeah,
move you. These are
yeah,
like stories in very few sentences, but they really leave you thinking. And I really appreciate that very much about the work. I enjoyed reading it. It was a delight to read. I didn't have to do several somersaults to understand what you were saying, and I really appreciate that. One of the things that I really enjoyed is seeing that the work speaks to several experiences. You just talked about, injustice, racism, people in transit. It's just really people going through different things. And one of those experiences you focused on is the immigrant experience and this idea of safe spaces.
Yeah.
And for example, in the poem Belonging, there's much beauty, in the foreign land, but darkness or rejection lurks beneath it. You talk about the cotton tree bloom being darkened by heart seeds. Can you share about how you were able to juxtapose these two ideas of beauty and rejection?
Um, so again, this is a poem that I won't say I wrote it when I was in the US, but there was this image. And I mean, most of the poetry that I write stems from one image that moved me. And in
Right.
this case, this was something I saw. And I was in Illinois, and the first time it snowed, it was so beautiful. I'd never seen
Mm,
snow, and I was like, wow. And then it didn't stop snowing, and it was so cold. And
yeah.
also, I found it very strange that you could go for miles and there are no human beings around.
Yeah.
And that's very strange coming from India, and I'm
Yeah.
sure it's like that in Nigeria because I'm like,
Absolutely.
where are the people? you know?
Yeah, that's precisely what I asked. Even in Iceland, I was like, where are all the people?
Exactly.
Why are the streets
So there's
deserted?
farms and there's no one, and
Yeah.
you go miles and you see these corn or something, and there's no human beings. So there's beauty, but it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's extreme weather there, and it's extreme weather in North India where I grew up. And I realized that the vocabulary changes, because
Mm,
like in spring, we have a very brief spring in North India, and we have those cotton trees, and they have these white fluffy balls, and
right.
it fills your house and the balcony like snow, because
Mm,
if from a distance it's like these
mm,
little snowballs, and they have these black seeds at the center. And then when I was in the US, it's also these snowballs everywhere around.
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and then there's this internal migration that's happening, because
Mm,
for the first time you realize that you are defined by the color of your skin,
right.
which is something really unusual. It should be not happening, but it
Right.
happens even now. And I grew up in a college. I spoke English, but then when I went there, suddenly it's like you have to take these English orientation classes because your fellow professors and students are saying you speak very softly because your accent is different.
Yeah.
So this safe space, it's even if it's not uh, unsafe, there is this strange feeling of being out of place
Yes.
because uh, the phrases that are used and the food and the landscape is so different
Yeah.
that you don't really feel at home.
Yeah.
And a lot of immigrants end up staying, which I did also. There's this other poem called Dreamland. So I write about this street called East White Street, which was filled with Indian and Sri Lankan and Pakistani students
Mm-hmm.
because it had cheap apartments.
Mm,
And if you walk, you will see these brown faces, and typically two or three students are sharing an apartment. And suddenly you start celebrating all the festivals, and you become very ironically very patriotic in some ways because
yeah.
you're missing home.
Yeah.
Um, so I think all of that was in my head. That
Yeah,
immigration is really a very splintering experience, which I'm
it
sure
is.
you're experiencing as well.
Yeah, it certainly is. It certainly is. And I think that it's so interesting, that poem Dreamland, and how the speaker talks about finding connection points, right? And I think that's one of the things that immigrants are told, like find your own community.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very interesting thing that you were able to show in that poem. And there's a beautiful blending in the collection of science and art. And sometimes the science explains the art, and sometimes the art explains the science. Can you speak a little bit about this codependence between art and science in your work? I mean, I think it comes from you being part scientist, part artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that considering that I spent most of my childhood and, I had studied up to my postgraduate degree
Mhm.
science, I feel that I should have more science maybe. My graduate advisor was very unhappy when I told her I'm leaving. And I remember emailing her a few years ago that I'm now working with a technology firm. And she said, she wrote back, well, I'm glad you're working in a job that has a bit of science in it. So I don't think she's forgiven me. Um, but again, I think that at first I felt almost defensive about the
Mm,
fact that I haven't studied literature. And most of my reading is once I started writing. I've not really studied literature. I've not been to any master's or any degree program. I've taken some online courses, but nothing like at a graduate level.
right.
So I used to be very quiet and I would almost hide the fact that I was a scientist. And then I realized that a poet, a writer, an artist actually observes a lot, right?
Mm,
Anybody would observe and then respond. And in a
yeah.
way, a scientist does the same. So there is this commonality and there is this dependency, I feel. And I realized that I bring a very different perspective. Uh,
Yes, you certainly do.
yeah, which is so actually my uh, research was so that poem photosynthesis, it takes off from what I was researching, which is about electrons and movement.
Hmm.
And I used to write these programs, and on your screen you would see these electrons, and it's very beautiful because
Hmm.
different colors. And also there was this things happening in my personal life, so it's very intertwined again in my head. And I felt that if I take a step back, both as an artist and as a scientist, I'm observing and then I'm responding. So that's where I
Yes.
think the dependency comes.
Yes, I really like that. That because that's so true of art. You have to observe, and again, that's also true for science. And I think oftentimes there's this silent war between the two fields, but it's really we're really both doing the same thing. And I love how you pointed that out. We're really all just observing life,
Yeah.
and expressing what our observations in different ways. So thank you for helping us to make sense of both worlds.
You're welcome. I'm glad you liked the poem because I feel a lot of people who read my work respond to the other poems, but I think you have unusually picked up that aspect.
Yeah, it stood out to me, and I saw that that like I said, that codependent science and art, it's like throughout your work there's such a beautiful merging of both worlds, and I couldn't help but bring it up. And also the collection is part memoir, as we said, and it has some painful themes, right? Like immigration hardship, abuse and heartbreak and injustices. But you use beauty and the preparation of food to convey some of these complex topics so that they're not jarring, but they are really quite introspective. Like you read it And instead of being almost traumatized, you come away with from it actually just thinking about what you've just read, and you know how is why is the world like this, and what are some things that we can do to change things. Can you share a bit about this dance between creativity and harsh circumstances?
I think there is a lot of conversation about that. That
Mm-hmm.
healing obviously happens through journaling and through art,
Yeah.
and I feel definitely in my case it helped to write. And I think any creative thing, it could be even cooking. Like
Mm-hmm.
for instance, my grandmother was both my grandmothers, my maternal and paternal grandmothers, were great cooks. I have not inherited, or rather, I think I saw that it takes so much effort. Like both
Yeah.
my grandmothers would spend hours in the kitchen, and then somebody comes and eats. In 10 minutes, the food is done. And I was like, no way, I'm not doing this. It's too much effort. But there's a certain artistry there,
Yeah, there
like
is.
people still remember that my paternal grandmother would make these wonderful sweet from cottage cheese, and people remember her cooking. Um, so I think I read this line from Emily Dickinson, which is again pretty well known, that tell the truth, but tell it slant.
Mm.
That you don't have to really rub your face, and um, also it's very hard sometimes to keep reading unpleasant things.
Yes.
And especially for people who probably have not been through it. Um, so I felt that for me, when I'm writing it through, um, there's this poem called The Secret to a Good Biryani, which is again about how you're trying to cook
Yeah.
in the West, and you have all the spices and you have all the
Yeah.
ingredients, but it doesn't taste the same.
Yes.
And it's about being homesick, and again, about trying to integrate when you're actually a foreigner.
Mm-hmm.
And in some ways you remain a foreigner because
Mm-hmm.
you've gone there as an adult, so it's very hard to really be at home.
Yeah.
um, and also there's poems about my aunt and my grandmother, and I think that um, there is art there, and there's also trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and I try to sort of bring out the trauma through the cooking or the
Yeah.
recipes,
Yeah.
because I felt that's a way of shining a light, but not in a very harsh way.
Right. Right. I really do like that. And especially what you said about telling the truth, but telling it slant, and not rubbing people's faces into, the experience that you're trying to shed a
Mhm.
light on. I mean, I think even for people who have been through negative experiences, they don't want to keep being reminded of,
Yeah,
how terrible it was. And so when I saw what it is you were doing, and that is my approach as well as a storyteller, I investigate hard circumstances and hard situations, but I don't want you to come away from it feeling raw and bruised. I want you to know about this, but I also want you to think about it and ask yourself, what would you do if it was you? And how
yeah,
can you help change society? And I
exactly.
think there is a delicate balance between showing the truth,
Hmm.
but showing it in a way that you help people to see and not look away because it's too painful, it's too jarring. And I think it's one of the hallmarks of your work. And I just wanted to shine a light on that. And thank you for doing that.
Thank
Another thing that I find fascinating in the collection is the emblems of home that are scattered throughout the collection. Right, like we have the scent of the frangipani, the cooking of biryani, the guava trees, even, like we were talking about the cotton flowers or the cotton
you.
trees. Like there are all these little emblems, these little pieces of home that the speaker, whatever the situation is, whether it's injustice or it's a heartbreak situation, it's helping them to make sense, right, of that particular situation. And it helps them to also navigate, right, between the transition between what was and what is. How did you achieve this delicate balance between the past and the present in your writing?
I think that balance is still a work in progress,
Mm.
because I think that any person who is creative is always sort of thinking about the past, and also the present. I mean, obviously, we are living in the moment and all that, but at least for me, I think this search for a place I can call home is
Mm-hmm.
something which is still there in my present, because I'm still living in Delhi and I've been here for so many years. But in some ways, it's not my home because I did not grow up here, I did not go to school here. And I keep thinking about the past, in that sense, that I remember my days in the US and I remember my days where I grew up. Um, but I also feel that my writing journey, and I think in that sense, you and I have this commonality. My writing journey is also a journey of feeling at home.
Mm.
So when I'm writing, I am rooting myself in a space that I can call home.
Right.
And that's why I think it's less about, who is reading it or how it's getting published. I mean, all of that is, of course, there. And the business of publishing is very difficult, and that will
Yeah.
probably take one other podcast session.
Yeah.
But at least for me, sometimes when I look around and I see the people who are getting published and doing quote unquote so well, I'm like, oh my god, because it seems like a competitive space. But then
Mm.
I take a step back, and for me, it's this balance that you're talking about,
Yeah.
and also feeling at home, feeling rooted.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of my life has been about finding those roots. Um, so I think I'm still trying, and I do write at other places, but I feel for some strange reason, like you were saying about Iceland, So when I
Mm.
was there, I didn't write. When I came back, it's there in my head, and I wrote a bit.
Yeah.
Uh, so with there's something about what is home, So it could be
Mm.
this desk, it could be this messy room, whatever. But it's also about always when you're writing, there's in your head, there's the past also. Uh, the neural network
Right.
is
Right.
mixing the past in the present.
Yeah. Right. I really like what you said about home and being able to write in a space that you feel like is home. And that's so helpful for me because we're just talking about how um in 2020, when the world was shut down because of COVID, there was some sort of displacement. And I think maybe that's what
Mhm.
I'm looking for still. Like I don't know if I feel fully at home to
Yeah.
be able to. I think I'm just only starting to feel like I'm home now,
Mhm.
and how do I find how do I get back to what I used to love doing? And I think there's something so there's such an important connection between that sense of belonging and being able to create. So thank you for highlighting that for me. That is a very useful a very useful thing for me.
Yeah.
And speaking of home, you are back home now in India.
Mhm.
What has your writing been like since you returned home? What are some themes that you're writing on? And I just want to know how home now impacts your writing.
So, some of the things I'm writing about or trying to write, because even my writing has been impacted in the last year or so, especially. I've been writing a lot of flash fiction because I realized that, as I said, my poems are like almost like fiction. So
Mm-hmm.
during pandemic, I didn't write much, but I became a part of some online workshops, and I realized there's this whole style of writing which is called flash fiction, and maybe for me that is something doable. I think, writing a novel, I think I've thought of it, but I'm like, that's a lot of effort and a lot of time. So I'm writing that, and I also have this idea of writing a bit about my family history, because, like I said, it's very interesting that my mother's side, the roots are in what is now Bangladesh, and there was this migration around partition. And my father's side is very rooted in Bengal and neighboring state.
Mhm.
Um, and also because of losing my dad, I've been writing a bit about grief. So I just finished reading Notes on Grief by Adichie.
Yep.
She lost her dad. And it's a
Yeah.
very slim book.
Yeah.
But this feeling of losing a parent so suddenly, and how the world around you sort of tries to, I think, comfort you.
Mm.
And sometimes that also angers you because
Mm.
you cannot really understand, especially when there's a sudden passing away.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to write a bit about that. So yeah, it's a mix. I think I haven't been writing a lot, but I have been trying to write on grief and a bit about, um, I wouldn't say nonfiction, but maybe inspired nonfiction, a bit about
Okay.
my family history.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds like something that you would be great at just from reading your poetry. Like I did say that they were like short stories, in very few words. So I really look forward to seeing what your flash fiction looks like. And I want to thank you so much for coming to chat with me today about Firefly Memories. I will leave the link to get the book in the description box or the show notes for anyone who's listening or watching. And thank you so much, Jonaki, for coming here. This has been a delight.
Thank you so much for hosting me, and you have always been so supportive and encouraging. And I remember the last day I think you were catching a flight back home, and
Yeah,
I was catching a flight, and you were like, no, let's sit and talk. And even then,
yeah.
I had so much self doubt, and you've always been very kind and supportive. So I appreciate
Oh,
it. And I wish you good luck. I hope
thank you.
this year is good in the sense of us both getting back to writing.
Yes, I hope so too. And thank you so much for letting me know that you felt supported.
Thank you.
You're welcome. On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at Journey of the Art Pod. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.